The subject of Pius XII, Gary is simply wrong. He is dead wrong. Dead because the memory of 6 million Jews is contingent on the outcome of conversations like these. Whether a man who, for the 6 years of the Holocaust, never once offered a single public protest to the greatest crime in the history of the world when it was happening in his backyard in Europe, and then literally outside his window on the 16th of October 1943 when the Jews of Rome were rounded up. Whether a man like that who could never object publicly to an atrocity of this magnitude can be called a saint. Time is limited. Let me begin by saying this book, of course, Hitler's Pope, is a national bestseller, was a devastating indictment of Pius XII. How devastating? Well, the Philadelphia Inquirer, which was quoted on the very opening page, says, "A devastating indictment of Pius as guilty of moral treachery, so grave that it defames his papacy and should deny his elevation to sainthood." Now, Gary says that John Cornwell retracted much of what he wrote, based on, the book was published, I think, in '99, based on much of what came out over the past decade, that he retracted it. You see here clearly in this book published by Paved the Way, author John Cornwell retracts his position taken in Hitler's Pope with the realization from the evidence and debates after the publication of his book. Is that really what John Cornwell did? Did he repudiate this incredible bestseller? This is the brand new version of the book. It has a new preface. The preface is titled, the date of the new preface is January 2008. I want to read the final few lines. "I remain convinced that in light of the pluralism of viewpoints and judgments about undisputed facts, Eugenio Pacelli, Pope Pius XII, was not a saintly exemplar for future generations, but as I have written in the last line of this book, he was a deeply flawed human being, from whom Catholics and our relations with other religions can best profit by expressing our sincere regret." Sincere regret about Pius XII. He has not retracted a thing. He does bring in some information. He says somehow a certain gloss, I'll get to that soon, over what happened when the Jews of Rome were gathered together right under Pope Pius XII's window in St. Peter's Square, and I'll come to that. So let's just begin to go through some of the indictment of Pius XII. Number one, Pius was the man, he was Cardinal Secretary of State in 1933, who forged the very first treaty ever signed with Adolf Hitler. How important was this to Hitler? He wrote, July 14, 1933, Adolf Hitler, "The Concordat," that's the treaty, "gives Germany an opportunity and creates an area of trust that is particularly significant in the developing struggle against international Jewry." Hitler understood that if he could neutralize the Catholic Church, the great moral voice of the world, if he could neutralize Pope Pius XI, if he could neutralize Eugenio Pacelli, the Cardinal Secretary of State, then 23 million Catholics who were living in Germany would not be opposed to Hitler's regime. And if he could have a moral stamp of approval from the world's largest religion, then no one would see him as being morally bankrupt, which is what, of course, the Nazis were. Now, you have to ask yourself, this man ran to sign a treaty with Hitler, the racist demagogue who Germans so feared in 1933. He did so because he got some funding for German schools. He did so because he was concerned that Hitler might harm the Catholic Church. What's the difference? You can't be the first to collaborate with evil. He personally negotiated this treaty, and he destroyed the Catholic Center Party. It was an independent, democratic Catholic institution. And it wasn't because he was anti-Semitic, although there are indications that he had certain antipathy towards Jews. Cornwell's argument is that Pacelli was an authoritarian. He believed that the Pope should control everything, and he didn't like the Catholic Center Party. He didn't like the fact that the Catholics had their own voice in Germany. He wanted the Vatican to control everything. This treaty with Hitler was negotiated without consultation of the Catholic German bishops, if you can believe that. When Pacelli became Pope, so Pius XI dies. I'll try to flesh this out if time permits. But he was about to issue an encyclical that finally condemned Nazi anti-Semitism in 1939. Unfortunately, he died before it was issued. Pius XII killed the encyclical. He destroyed every copy of it, and then he even destroyed the printing presses that were going to be used to print it. Instead, as soon as he becomes Pope, this is what he writes to Adolf Hitler. This is 1939 now, not 33 anymore. By now the whole world knows who Hitler is. They know he is a monster. They know he is the greatest criminal to run a country in the history of the world. This is what the foremost moral authority on earth decided to write to him as soon as he became the Pope. To the illustrious Adolf Hitler, Führer and Chancellor of the German Reich. Here, at the beginning of our pontificate, we wish to assure you that we remain devoted to the spiritual welfare of the German people, entrusted to your leadership. It's an astonishing thing to write. When Hitler had visited Rome under Pius XI, Pius XI left Rome. He went to Castel Gandolfo, his summer retreat. He was disgusted by Hitler. But this Pope decides to send him a letter calling him the illustrious Herr Hitler. Why would he write any such thing? Did he not understand that he was giving him a stamp of approval? Could you imagine if today Pope Benedict were to write to say, I don't know, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, we know that God has entrusted the Iranian people to your leadership? There were no elections left in Germany by then. Hitler was an absolute dictator. He was slaughtering all his political opponents. This is after Kristallnacht. Could you imagine? The only person who survived the 16th of October 1943, actually, you know, before I read this, I want to actually get more into it. And from that point on, the Pope pursued a policy of complete and absolute neutrality for the 6 years of the war. It is absolutely true, as Gary can show in documents, that when approached on many occasions, the Pope interceded to save Jewish lives. That is absolutely true. But what's at question here is not whether someone who could save lives actually did it. We would like to believe that anyone who, without risk to themselves, could save lives did so. But every time there was something public, the Pope absolutely refused to take sides in a war between the Allies and the Germans. I mean, if there wasn't, was there a clearer example in world history of a fight between good and evil? Stutz Terkel wrote a book called The Good War. All Americans agreed this wasn't the war in Iraq or the war in Afghanistan where a percentage of the population said, no, we don't have to fight Hitler. This was the good war. It was the clearest example of good versus evil. But the Pope is the one who decides to be neutral on Hitler. You want to tell me that's a saint? Later, when the Pope spoke to a Jewish group, the Supreme Council of the Arab People of Palestine, it was a Semitic group, in 1946, he actually had the audacity to say that he had condemned, quote, on various occasions, the fanatical anti-Semitism inflicted on Hebrew people. He had never done so once. In fact, what does Cornwell write about that quote? From all that we know of his papacy, this constituted a blatant lie. Now you gotta be pretty confident of your facts to write an international bestseller and call a pope a liar. Yet no one's contradicted this. He never once explicitly condemned German anti-Semitism. Which time do I have? Okay. When the Pope was approached time after time, especially by Myron Taylor, he was an American ambassador who had great personal peril, made it into Rome through Lisbon. Remember, Rome is run by Mussolini. He's an ally of Hitler. An American ambassador makes it into Rome and into the Vatican. He pleads with the Pope over a couple of days, please condemn the Holocaust. And the Pope knew what was happening. He had reports already from the spring of 1942 of the mass slaughter of Jews. He has all the facts. He has one of the best information networks in Europe. Now an American risks his life to come to the Pope and he's pleading with him. He's saying, you know, Churchill, Roosevelt, all the great world leaders, they're condemning the persecution of the Jews. We're asking you to lend your voice. The Pope responded, officially, quote, the Holy See has always been and still is greatly preoccupied, out of a heart filled with constant solicitude, with the fate of civil populations defenseless against the aggression of war. Do you believe these ridiculous platitudes? They were gassing 15,000 Jews a day! A day! And this man could not condemn it! Since the outbreak of the present conflict, no year has passed that we have not appealed in our public utterances to all the belligerents. All the belligerents. Yeah, Americans were also gassing people, right? We're appealing to Americans should stop slaughtering people, and you British should stop gassing people, you Germans should stop gassing people, all of you should stop. It goes on. It's not even worth reading. It's just a like absolutely useless declaration, as he always did, because he just would not take any sides. He was being prodded by the British ambassador Osborne, who was living in the Vatican at the time. And he was being told by Osborne, who was close to him, your moral authority is gone. You've lost your moral, you're the Pope, say something for God's sake. Everyone was begging him. They said, even if you condemn the Holocaust for no other purpose than to inform the Jews what's really going to happen to them with deportations to the East. Because a lot of Jews really thought they were being moved to labor camps. But if the Pope and the Allies were saying to him, when we broadcast these radio messages to the Jews of Europe, they think, oh, these are the Allies, this is propaganda. They're trying to slander the Axis powers by saying that they're engaged in genocide. But if you, the Pope, say it, they'll believe you and they'll run. And he still wouldn't do it. He could have saved millions of lives.